If you're going to be sane, you have to be acceptable to, valued by, and in constant contact with a social group. That's going to cause some conflict, obviously, because you're going to discuss difficult things. For all your skill, I'm a bit ashamed of you. And the kid says, "What's your problem, Dad or Mom? What's your problem?" They'll have some meaning in your life, and then when those storms come, you'll have something to I could dominate you on a one-on-one, but the problem is you wouldn't want to have anything to do with me again. You have to do that because life is difficult.
Make friends with people who want the best for you. Talk about that, especially in light of isolation issues for leaders.
Yeah, well, here's a way of thinking about it's hard to get the terms right because we talk about it, our culture, and psychologists as well, talk about it as mental health. And it sort of sounds like something that's in your head, in your brain. Mental health means you have a healthy nervous system. Mental health means you're well structured internally as a psychological entity. And that's actually, it's half true. So here's an example. Let's say you are mentally healthy and one of your children is doing very badly. Well, you're going to be suffering away. You're going to be anxious and distressed and have some decrement of hope. And so that's not you exactly, not if you think of you as something that's only internal, but it's definitely something that's affecting your mental health. And the reason for that is that mental health is not you. So you need to be well constituted psychophysiologically, right? Your body has to be in working order. And the different elements of your nervous system have to be integrated into something like a coherent and visionary whole. And that's you. But then, you need an intimate partner. And that has to be a dyadic relationship that's communicating well. And then that needs to be nested inside a family. And that needs to be nested inside a community, including a community of friends. And then that needs to be nested inside a town or a city and a state or a province and then a nation. And all of those things have to be working harmoniously together. And so if you're going to be sane, you have to be acceptable to, valued by, and in constant contact with a social group. And then you need to, select your social group carefully. This is why there were businessman organizations like the Rotary and the Kinsmen and so forth. And, we see their membership plummeting in recent years. But it was there because people were wise enough to understand that even if you had attained things, on your own as a solitary venture, an entrepreneur, that it was extremely useful to have a community around you.
It's not good that man be alone.
No. You look, here's how you stay sane. This is what sane means. Sane means that you are acceptable enough to other people so they tell you when you're stupid. Right, because if you have 20 people, well, that's exactly, you distribute the problem of your own sanity. That's right. Well, that's what marriage, in a huge part, the advantage of marriage is that your wife taps you back into position and vice versa. And all you have to do is be acceptable enough so she won't leave and she'll continue to do that. Right. Right. Well, every single one of us is so complicated that we can't regulate ourselves. You'll fall apart on your weakest side. But if you have people around you who are bolstering you, and those would be genuine friends, those are people who are pleased when good things happen to you and commiserate with you when bad things happen to you, right? They're there in good times and bad. And you know who your friends are, especially if you've gone through bad times. And it isn't that those friends in some ways are additions to your mental health. They are actually, without them, there's no way you can be mentally healthy. Any more than a kid with no friends can be a happy kid, right? The definition of a happy kid is one who's at the center of a well-functioning network of voluntary friends. There's no difference between that and setting up your life properly. That's why children set their lives up like that. They're doing that to practice becoming a fully functional adult. And so you need a network around you that's thriving and communicating. And, another thing to understand too is the mechanism of free speech is the process by which those social relationships maintain their integrity. So, in a marriage, if the principle of free speech doesn't apply in your marriage, it's doomed. because you cannot discuss your actual problems and solve them. And then they just accrue, like the little dragon that we talked about at the beginning of this conversation. They just accrue, and once there's enough of them, then you spend your fortune in divorce court. Right, so unless you can speak freely with your wife, and that means there's going to be some conflict, because free speech means conflict, because you're dealing with real problems. Unless that principle of free speech applies, the relationship will disintegrate. And that's the same at every level. That's why free speech isn't a right given to you by the state. Free speech is the precondition for the stability of the state, and it has to stay the hell away from it, from interfering with that principle, or it will doom itself. Right, so that's why we think about it as a God-given right? It's outside, it's the process upon which the integrity of the state itself depends, no matter what level you're conceptualizing the state. Because your marriage is a tiny state, and it's the same with your family. And if the information is flowing freely, that's going to cause some conflict, obviously, because you're going to discuss difficult things. And you have to do that because life is difficult. And, a problem's going to come at your family, and you guys aren't going to feel the same way about how to solve it. So then you have to have an argument about it. You have to exchange your opinions, and hopefully you do that in a way that helps you come up with a solution to the problem that's likely to work. And all that's dependent on free speech. So
now walk through how this connectivity with people causes your personal growth, causes you to become something tomorrow that you aren't today.
Well, look, think about what we're doing in this dialogue, Like, there's a variety of things happening here at the same time. So you and I are trying to establish a relationship, at least for the purpose of this podcast, right? And so,
right.
And maybe if we have some sense, we're trying to do it in a way that would make it more likely for us to want to meet again in the future. So we could attempt to dominate each other, and we could attempt to one-up each other, and we could attain some relative status in doing that right now. But if you did that to me, I wouldn't talk to you again, and vice versa. So that would be a stupid medium to long-term strategy. Instead, we could sit here and try to exchange some information in an exploratory way, and you could come away, somewhat changed, and I can come away somewhat changed, and that's a good deal. And then maybe we'd enjoy that if we did it in proper proportion, and we think, we could have another conversation, and that would be the beginning of a friendship, right? And you can see an ethic emerging out of that. Now, it's more complicated than that in this situation, because we have to do that in a way that engages you. And that means we have to craft our gestures and our words in a way that brings you in as participants in the conversation. You might say, well, it's not a conversation because you're on stage. It's like, if it's not a conversation, your mind is going to wander. You're going to start thinking, I might as well check my phone. Or you're going to be thinking about other problems that you have in the back of your mind. They're going to come to the forefront. It's a conversation if the two of us are capturing your interest because we're watching you and paying attention to the situation and ensuring that the points that we continue to make are keeping your attention. Now, if you're a public speaker, you can tell that because of the silence. See, you know that if the crowd is silent and people aren't rustling around, that they're not distracted. And if they're not distracted, they're focused, and if they're focused, that it's a conversation. And so you're participating in the conversation with your nonverbal attention. But that doesn't mean it's not a conversation. It's still a conversation. And so we're doing that all together.
Social media has made the comparison game get completely out of control. And in business, we always study best practices. We want to see what another organization is doing. And the downfall for that I've seen so many times personally, and also with some of the folks we coach, that the downfall of that is that you can get a bit ADD. You can get all over the map. In other words, you can change your direction 16 times because you're constantly comparing yourself to others. And one of your 12 rules is compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not to who someone else is today.
Well, part of the problem possibly with social media is that it's a lot of one-off comparisons. like I said, if we were never going to see each other again, ever, arguably, although I still think this is wrong, arguably I could take a chance to just defeat you, right? Because then I would accrue the status and could move on. Now, if we're constrained by the fact that we have to meet again, then that's a stupid strategy. That's why you tell your kids, by the way, this is another example of how you act out an ethos that you don't understand. Maybe you have a kid on the sports field who's a real star. Maybe he's more skilled than anyone else on the playing field. But he's kind of a jerk, and he won't pass to his teammates. And if he scores, he takes all the credit and does a little dance. And if he loses, he whines. And so you're embarrassed. And you tell your kid, look, for all your skill, I'm a bit ashamed of you. And the kid says, what's your problem, Dad or Mom? What's your problem? I am the best player out there, and my team would have lost without my effort. And, that might be true. And you think, well, it doesn't matter whether you win or lose. It matters how you play the game. And the kid says, yeah, but I tried to win, and I did win, and so, what are you talking about? And you don't know what to say. And what you say is, look, kid, the winner is the one who gets asked to play again. Right, exactly that, man. And if you violate that principle, you think you've won because you're a fool. You're taking the local victory over the long-term victory. And you don't do that. You don't subordinate the long-term victory to the local victory. And when you tell your kid to be a good sport, you're saying, conduct yourself in a manner that makes you the person that everyone invites to play forever. And you do that. How do? You know how you do that. You give credit where it's due. You don't take all the victory onto yourself. You try to nurture the people underneath you, so to speak, so that they can become as or more competent than you, right? You take responsibility for the flaws. You're not too triumphant when you win, and you're not too devastated when you lose. Those are all the principles of fair play. And the reason those are principles is because if you play that way, people will invite you to keep playing. And so if your kid is a good sport, he'll have friends, and maybe friends for life, and then he wins. And you say, you don't sacrifice that kid so that you can be the best soccer player here today when you're, in grade 6, and you have this local victory. That's stupid. That's foolish. It's unwise. Now, generally, we're not articulate enough to lay that out. But, when you lay it out like that, people can understand it right away. You have to conduct your businesses like that.
Exactly. It has to be reciprocal.
100%. And the more reciprocal your business is, the more it'll thrive, You want your customers to be not satisfied. You want your customers to be thrilled. And you want to do the same with people you enter into a business relationship with. I mean, that's my criteria for being involved in a business. That was the criteria for the Daily Wire deal that I made a year ago. It's like we both walked away from that negotiation thrilled. The idea was, yeah, absolutely, man. We're 100% on board with this. And that's what you want from a supplier, right? If you're the kind of negotiator that walks away from your supplier going, I already got one up on him, it's like, yeah, till he figures it out. And then has 100 schemes up his sleeve how you're now low priority business on the supply chain front. You want the guy to think, oh my God, this is such a good deal. I can hardly believe it happened. And I'm going to do absolutely everything I possibly can to make this relationship last. And you want the same attitude, well, with your wife and your husband, that's for sure, but definitely with your customers, if you have any sense at all. And most of you, all of you, I presume, to the degree that you've been successful, you know this. You want people to be thrilled with the fact that they're dealing with you. And I mean, the best companies I've ever dealt with, they'll make mistakes. But then when you call them and you say, look, this kind of screwed up, they say, hey, man, we're sorry. We will be over there to fix this right now. And please let us know if there's anything else we can do to rectify our error. And that's not just, HR marketing hand-waving. They're over there the next day and they fix the mistake. And so then you think, well, not only do they try hard, but even if they do screw up, they fix it. Oh, I'm perfectly happy to continue that relationship into the foreseeable future. That's the basis for voluntary exchange that iterates. See, one of the things that psychologists have learned is that that's how ethics itself emerges. Ethics is the pattern of behavior, let's say in conception, that governs repeated interrelationships. So I could dominate you on a one-on-one, let's say. But the problem is you wouldn't want to have anything to do with me again. And if we're going to interact repeatedly, which we want to do if we're going to establish a credible, let's say, real and deep business relationship, I better be certainly treating you as well as I would treat myself, and vice versa. And I think it's partly because there's no difference. If we're going to interact in the long run, the difference between us starts to disappear. Because your interest is now, it's literally now my interest. They are the same thing. And if you surround yourself with 1,000 people and their interest and your interest is now theirs and vice versa, well, you have 1,000 people working in your interest. I mean, how could you possibly have a better deal than that? There's 1,000 of them and one of you. If you're working hard to promote their interests and they see that, they're going to work hard to promote yours, and then everybody wins. And what I mean by that is that's actually how societies become wealthy, abundant. I mean, literally everybody wins. And it's not because then that 1,001 are extracting excess resources from the other million. They're actually creating abundance. They're creating wealth. It's not theft. You can't steal what's not there. It has to be produced. And you produce it, obviously, you produce it through the voluntary exchange of labor. Clearly. And this is another place where the left, they're so off target ethically. The degree of absolute poverty in the world since the fall of the Berlin Wall, essentially, it has plummeted so fast. It's unparalleled in human history. There wouldn't be any people in the world who are in privation now if it wasn't for political corruption. And it's all because the principle of voluntary exchange has become almost a universal norm, even though, we're starting to savage it again. And that's lifted the billions of people that everyone predicted would starve, the majority of them into the middle class, right? In 30 years. It's an absolute bloody miracle. And the idea that the leftist radicals who criticize that could possibly have the moral upper hand in the face of that kind of evidence, it's a kind of miracle. And it's a miracle of inarticulate guilt on the part of the classic liberal and conservative types, because the evidence is crystal clear. There are a vanishingly small proportion of the world's population is in absolute privation. And if we continue even on the developmental pathway that we're on now, there'll be no poverty in the world at all by 2035, despite the fact that there'll be like 8 billion people. I mean, my God, it's such a miracle, and that's a voluntary exchange miracle. And to the degree that you're participating in that, you're bringing that about. There's nothing to feel guilty about on that front. So, and you have to become articulate enough to start to be able to defend this. And maybe that's why you want to take on your political responsibility, because doing that would force you to become articulate enough to defend your principles. And that's a good thing to learn, and then you're models for the young people in your community who are looking at a pathway forward that involves responsible citizenship instead of this idiot subjectivity that they're being conned into by the radicals. It's like, no, get out there and be responsible and productive and generous. That's a way to have a life. Get married, have some kids, start a business, do something productive, profitably, and then be intelligently generous. You'll have some meaning in your life. And then when those storms come, you'll have something to buttress you. Some real relationships, some real accomplishments. That in your own life, the things that you've done well. That's what you've got when the storms come. And so you want to invite young people along for that. And you got to shed your foolish guilt in order to manage that.
Dr. Jordan Peterson, ladies and gentlemen.